So let's have a conversation with regards to the European Union and the kind of support that we've received as a country in this fight against COVID-19. Remember, earlier, a couple of months back, we spoke with the EU ambassador to Kenya. This is Simon Mordue, and he was telling us what the EU is doing in terms of budgetary support to the country, in terms of even supporting some projects, and the projects that are across the country, looking at how to improve access, water access to communities. And that was very important because COVID, water, sanitation, important. And that's what they spoke about. So we're going straight into communities and working with communities on how to improve their access to water and sanitation, better water and sanitation, looking at how else we can even work with the government on, making this better. There's money that has, of course, been dedicated to this. So there have been very many areas in which the European Union and the partners in this fight have come to the assistance of Kenya on this particular matter. So let's bring in the EU ambassador to Kenya, Simon Mordue, and we'll also be speaking to Catherin Collin. She is the regional representative for the European Investment Bank. Let's start with the EU ambassador. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be with you again.
We're glad to have you. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you.
Since the last time we spoke, I mean, it was right time. It was at the height of trying to address the impact of COVID-19, trying to understand what COVID-19 is doing to the communities around the world, and trying to understand what it is that we, as people in Kenya, can do, and the kind of support that the European Union was offering. And you told us about, just like I've mentioned, the water and sanitation projects that you had around the country. Just a recap: what is it that you've done so far on that front?
It's been a busy period. Together with the member states and the European Investment Bank, we mobilised a package of something around 40 billion Kenyan shilling, actually trying quite a few innovative things. One example, we've been doing direct cash transfers via M-Pesa into the informal settlements around Nairobi, with some 20,000 households, 80,000 people benefiting from support varying between 5,000 Kenyan shillings and 8,000 Kenyan shillings a month, all done in full coordination with the Ministry of Labour. We've also tried to make a real difference on the front line with the provision of personal protection equipment and other materials. Give you an example, I was at the regional hospital in Kisumu a week ago, and there, working with the Kenyan Red Cross, we had put up a screening facility which had allowed 200,000 people to be screened, both for COVID, but also for other diseases. We'd also been working with the doctors to make sure they were properly equipped and were able to benefit from psychosocial counselling. Also on the water side, we've been doing some work to make sure that there's sanitation facilities available. This has been both with the direct budget from the European Union, but also the member states contributing in a coherent package. So Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Germany, to name a few, were very active as well in the water sector. I think one of the key things was the rapidity of the response. Most of these programs are in full swing, some even close to coming to an end. And another very, very important aspect, perhaps which Catherin is best placed to expand upon, is with the European Investment Bank. We were quite keen to make sure that small and medium-sized enterprises in particular would be able to continue to access credit for the recovery from the COVID period. So I think it has been a heavy period of work, but one which has been able to demonstrate the solidarity of the people of the European Union with the people of Kenya and make a real impact.
And that sounds like, it's a lot of good work that has happened on the ground. And we'll discuss even the impact and the lessons that we draw out of this. Let's bring in Catherin. Catherin Collin is the regional representative for the European Investment Bank. Good morning, Catherin.
Good morning.
Thank you, and it's good to have you on the show as well this morning. Simon has just talked about some of the areas where the European Investment Bank had also come into support in this fight against COVID-19. And this is about SME support and getting them access to credit. How did you roll this out?
Well, actually, SME support is somehow in the DNA of the European Investment Bank, both in the European Union and elsewhere. And somehow, over the last couple of years, we had already invested, about 42 billion shilling through local banks, and that was rolled out to SMEs. So we thought that in these hard times where SMEs and micro enterprise are very hardly hit by the pandemic, that the best way for us to help would be to try and boost access to finance. One thing we noticed that, of course, in periods like this, the risk perception of the banks is a bit greater, of course, and they are banks, so they want to get their money back. So we said, okay, let's try and facilitate the work of the bank in a way in providing them with liquidity. And so it's about 20 billion shillings of additional liquidity that will be provided to the local banks with a little incentive for them to lend. And this incentive, we have received it from the European Union. So that's what we call blending. We mix different resources so that the funding that goes to the local banks is more affordable, and we make sure that this affordability is reflected in what the SMEs will receive. So that's what we call boosting access to finance, and that's what we have decided to do for Kenya, because we know that the SME are really the backbone of the economy here in Kenya. But
when you
we
say,
have also...
Sorry, please go ahead.
No, I think one other thing, we've also... We do a lot of infrastructure financing, and very often that's how people know about the EIB. And so we have also continued on that side. So, for instance, there is a project in the Kisumu area together with the European Union and the Agence Française de Développement, where we will support water supply, improve sanitation, which of course is extremely important in COVID times as well.
When you say affordable loans, do you mean to say that what will be charged in terms of interest will be something that is lower than the current commercial rates that the banks lend money out to? Or is it something that is concessionary and that is determined or predetermined so that it follows guidelines that don't necessarily comply with what our commercial banks would follow? What is affordable?
Well, affordable is a notion that is very wide. What we are doing here is that we are asking the bank to make those loans available at rates that, of course, cover their costs and, part of the risk perception, but they will be slightly cheaper than commercial loans. I mean, the role, what is important is that also these monies will be made available with longer tenor. So you see the advantage that they get is getting funding first, because in these times it's not so obvious that they would get funding, get it at longer periods of time, and also for working capital, for instance, which is also very important in these times, and then get it at a rate. I can't tell you a rate because, it will depend from one bank to the other, but we will have a system whereby we ensure that the rate given or charged to the final beneficiary is in line with what we have agreed with the bank in terms of affordability. You
have preempted my next question, because I was actually going to ask you, what is this rate? Because yes, so well done. I will now ask it in a roundabout way. Since it is something that is affordable and it is clear that it's meant for SMEs, do you have the numbers of SMEs that have been able to access these loans? And do you have any success stories? And if they are failures, what are they and what has brought them about?
No, not yet. Actually, I think it's a bit early still to give you this type of information. When we measure the impact or the outcome of a facility, we always wait to have a little bit of time behind to just make the observation. So I think I'm afraid I can't give you this answer.
How old is this operation?
Well, it's been done this year. We have one there's one part of the operation that is targeting essentially the agriculture sector. That was also done together with the European Union, and the other one we are in the final stage of putting them in place. So yes, it will help the SMEs through the recovery phase as well. I think that's also equally very important, because we are not out of the bush yet, as we say in my own language.
And which language is this, if I may ask?
French.
So you differ from your cousins across the English Channel, and who would say out of the woods, is it?
Yeah, exactly. But I'm Belgian, actually, so that's maybe why there is a little nuance.
Okay.
Catherin, if I may ask you, Catherin, so
Yes.
with the support that you've given to the SMEs, do you have any like success stories that you can say through the support that was offered by the EIB? There's a couple of SMEs that would have gone under, that would have that were likely to have even folded, but then they were able to access this credit. They were able to access affordable credit. They have maintained their workforce, and they have also been able to continue operating.
I can't give you a name yet. I mean, unfortunately, I would love to be able to do that. I mean, unfortunately, I can't. But I mean, this is something, you know, if we meet again in a couple of months' time, then
Yep.
I'm sure I will be able to give you a very long list, actually, of names. Once we've gone through the exercise of talking to our banks and seeing with them, okay, give us some example and some good stories. There will be good stories. I am convinced about this.
Simon, I'd like to ask a question. When you talked about this lovely and wonderful help that you're providing for people who are in need, I'd like to ask, what is the selection criteria? How was it determined that these individuals were receiving the assistance were the ones who qualified?
You're talking now about, I presume, the M-Pesa cash transfer assistance.
Yes.
Correct?
I am talking about monies in whatever form they were transferred that the European Union has made available to those who are in need. Yes, the cash transfer specifically. Yes.
Exactly. Well, the key point was it was done very much in coordination with the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection for some of their emerging welfare schemes. And it was a hard slog. We were basically working hand in hand with both Oxfam and the Kenyan Red Cross. And they did basically a door-to-door identification of people who were facing particular challenges. Now, there were some segments of society that we very much chose to put very deliberately a particular focus on. To give you one example, in the pandemic, we have unfortunately seen an increase of sexual and gender-based violence, and there are a lot of women who have faced quite a lot of very negative consequences, partly caused by the crisis and partly caused for other reasons. We put a particular focus on victims of SGBV, and with some of the NGOs that were also very active in that front, we were able to ensure that they were able to receive these cash transfers. In many cases, this was a lifeline for them. I was able to meet a couple of weeks ago a group of SGB victims who benefited from this support, and to hear their stories was both harrowing but also quite inspirational in the sense of the lifeline that this had given them. So I think the key thing is everything was done in full cooperation with the Ministry of Labour. So any recipients of this cash assistance, this was taken into account in terms of support they were receiving from other sources. It was done on the ground, and I think actually, more generally, this has been one of the secrets of success of the EU SWIFT response. We've worked with partners who are well established here, have got a footprint on the ground, and were able to very rapidly mobilise the reaction and also account for every Kenyan shilling that was spent. And that is important because ultimately I think we shouldn't forget these funds that are being provided for the Kenyan people are being provided by the taxes of the European Union citizens.
As you look at this, this is for both of you, what would you say that as you went through these projects and helping out people who needed this assistance, what would you say that you've learned from this moving forward for any challenges that come about in the future, for things that need to be done, for help that needs to be accorded? What would you say you learned, or what would you do differently?
Catherin, if I perhaps start on this, I would say
Yes.
I think there are a few lessons of success. First, time was very much here of the essence. Sometimes development projects have a long cycle where many months are taken for design, many years taken for implementation. Here, I think we were able, as the European Union, to respond very quickly. Secondly, I would stress the word partnerships. Partnerships first and foremost with the Kenyan government. There was a very strong sense of ownership for this response by the Kenyan government. I even remember, to tell you one anecdote, the President himself ringing me to discuss a tiny bit the response and stressing some of the aspects that were important for him. Third, to have strong implementing partners with a track record of successful delivery on the ground. In our case, that involved working with people like AMREF, like the Kenyan Red Cross, like Oxfam. Third, we put a strong emphasis on supporting also domestic industry. So, for example, when we were talking with AMREF and the Kenyan Red Cross on the production of the PPE and the masks, we were very strongly incentivizing them to buy local. So a lot of the support that we have been provided has been produced by the Kenyan companies. And I think you got a return there that perhaps was not initially expected. And secondly, I want to just for a moment pay tribute to overall the response of the Kenyan government to COVID. It's not easy. It's been a challenge for all countries in the world. European Union countries haven't always found the right balance between keeping the economies running and protecting the health and safety of individuals. But there's been a consistency of approach from the Kenyan government that I think is admirable, and that has also enabled the response to be successful and make an impact, because we were working with a partner with whom there was a constant dialogue and a positive reaction.
All right, I think it's time for us to take a quick break here on the conversation that we're having this morning. We are speaking with Simon Mordue. He's the EU ambassador to Kenya, and Catherin Collin, she's the regional representative for the European Investment Bank, looking at the response to COVID-19, the kind of support that we have received as a country from the European Union, from the European Investment Bank. And we'll also be talking shortly about the search for COVID-19 and then what progress is being made there and what kind of support the EU and the EIB could also be able to extend to countries like Kenya and other middle-income countries and low-income countries, and on the access to these vaccines. Time for us to take a break at 25 minutes past 7 o'clock. This is Kenya's biggest conversation, broadcasting on Spice FM and KTN Home and online. Keep it right here. We'll be back shortly. This and every weekday morning, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., you have in the room Eric Latif, Nduoko, and C.T. Muga. In this hour, we're having a conversation with the EU ambassador to Kenya, Simon Mordue, and the regional representative for the European Investment Bank, Catherin Collin. COVID-19 period has been time for people to learn. Speak to the private sector, they say there have been lessons taken out of this. You speak to ordinary individuals, there have been lessons. Even the government has been talking about, well, we've learned a lot from this COVID-19 in what we are able to do, what we are not able to do, what our governments are able to do, what our governments are not able to do. For yourselves as the European Investment Bank, Catherin, what lessons have you learned in offering and lending support to governments during this time of COVID-19?
I think what we have learned, and that applies to Kenya, but to all the countries, is that as Simon mentioned earlier, working together is clearly the way to go. And I think this pandemic has shown one thing, is that we are able to work together, and that happened in a time where, even our own countries in Europe were badly hit by the pandemic, but still I think we all found the energy to work together also to assist other countries. So that's the main thing, and that was really a partnership, talking to each other. And I have to say, I would agree with Simon when he says it was quite impressive to also see the openness of the government of Kenya. Sometimes I smile because I think the way we have been interacting with the authorities here and also with the private operators during this crisis has somehow been even better. I mean, there was a closer access and more direct access. So I think that's one element that I would take away from this. And also I think what we've learned is that big machine like us, because we are large institutions and we have therefore, it can be a heavy process, but I think there was a demonstration that we are able to mobilize ourselves in order to deliver rapidly, and that applies across the globe de facto. That's what I would draw as a lesson on this one.
Okay. So, there's still, how long is this support going to go on? We know, I mean, we talked about what the plan was, and in terms of longevity for the projects that you have really invested in, especially around COVID. Are we looking at, and then at the same time, we see that also some projects that have been started off locally will come to an end because of, whether lack of resources or the time period has essentially lapsed. Are we seeing a continuation of the help that you have, I mean, with the assistance that you've been giving? Are we seeing a continuation of this, or is it a wait and see, Simon?
That's actually a very timely question, because yesterday afternoon there was a lengthy discussion between my president, so the president of the European Council, and President Kenyatta. And one of the things they were talking about was the continued importance of the EU-Kenyan relationship, and also the financial priorities for the years ahead, because we're in the home straight of our exercise to define the areas of focus and priority as we move forward. And I think one of the challenges that we face globally is, if we ask ourselves the question, where do we want the world to be, and what kind of world do we want in the post-COVID environment? I think our challenge is not necessarily just to recover to where we were, but to recover better. And I think for Kenya, that means in particular, we can support what I would describe as a green transition in Kenya that can create jobs and leverage on Kenya's leading economic position in East Africa. I think there's particularly an opportunity here around the digital agenda and the untapped potential for jobs there. This is an area that in the COVID response, we've also had some focus. We've been doing some work, for example, with the judiciary and the Witness Protection Agency to use technologies to allow people to give evidence in front of court, and we've seen quite significant efficiency gains. And I think if you look at Kenya, Kenya is well located to really benefit from this. You're one of the world's leading producers of renewable energy. You have a unique biodiversity, which there are huge economic opportunities around. I think this is our challenge as we move forward, to move away perhaps from the classical development aid and a donor-recipient relationship, to develop a much stronger economic and trading relationship, and try and use some of our grant funding, development funding, in imaginative ways, building on the experience that we've seen as well with COVID. So using the grants to leverage significant buy-in and loans from bodies such as the European Investment Bank, our twin sister or twin brother, depending on how you view it, but also crowding in the private sector so that you're also really supporting a rise up the value chain. And I think with this, we can deepen and strengthen our relationship and also provide answers and support to the many young people who are looking desperately for jobs and economic employment.
What I wanted to ask you, Simon, is this. When you talk about a partnership with the country, there has always been the issue of accountability that we in the media raise and other stakeholders also raise. How do you ensure that there is accountability from the government?
Well, to give you a very good example, one element of our response that we provided to the government in the COVID response was a 30 million euro cash transfer, direct injection into the budget to support the government's response. So quite clearly, we have shared the concerns which have been raised by you, the media, by many Kenyan citizens on what happened in Kemsa. And as part of our process, prior to dispersing, we wanted quite strong assurances from the government that the necessary follow-up will be given to Kemsa, that the people who were accountable for what happened will be held accountable and be brought to justice, because this is something which is as important to us as it is to the Kenyan citizens. So this was very much part of our dialogue with the government, with CS Yatani, with the CS for Health, in which we wanted to understand better to what extent progress had been made on the clear indications which had been given by the President that this was not acceptable and those responsible for this should be brought to justice. So we're pleased to see that the investigations are proceeding. Of course, I think the proof of the pudding ultimately will be, will convictions be secured and those that are responsible for what happened brought to justice?
Okay, now the same accountability. How do you ensure there is accountability with the banks who you give the money to? Well, let me ask a better question. The processes of giving this money to the banks, what is it that is done to ensure that this money goes to those who it is intended for and that it achieves what it's intended for?
I guess this question is for me.
Yes, it is.
So actually, I mean, we have a very strong accountability mechanism, simply because we are also accountable up to the European Parliament and to the national parliament of the European Union member states. So actually, we have a process whereby we do ask the banks to give us the list of the companies that will benefit from the loans that they grant with our money, and there will be at some stage some a kind of a monitoring or an evaluation, and there may be some random check, and then we will meet some of the entrepreneurs. I think in the way in the approval process, in the due diligence, we actually have to put an estimate of the number of companies, and then we will thereafter make a check ex post, if I may say, of the companies and how the money has been used. So it's quite a heavy process, to tell you the truth. So it's not such an easy going, and so it does put a number of constraints on the banks. We have very stringent standards, especially, for instance, environment and social standards, and we make sure that the banks will comply with these standards, or will lend the money to companies that also will comply with these standards in all sorts of areas. So it is very a strong control mechanism, and there will be ex post reporting and control on a random basis thereafter. And there will be evaluation of the impact of the facility. But of course, all that takes place over time. And I think one thing I would like to say as well is that we are here to stay. I mean, we've been in Kenya since 1976, and we've been providing support since. In the long term, we will continue to provide support to the Kenyan economy, because and especially in this time, I think, as far as the EIB is concerned, clearly we are already building the pipeline of future intervention and working together with the EU and see how best we can help this green transition and green recovery. We are doing a lot in the digital agenda. We're looking at how to help as well, connectivity and all these areas. But the accountability mechanisms are there, and there will be some control. And I think with banks, we are working with banks that have proven track records as well, and so that we know them, because we've been working with them over the past couple of years. And there's also a very important element of trust in the relationship with those banks.
Okay, well, some developments have been made, and there's been talk as we've been going around. If we now go into this part of this conversation now, starting off with you, Simon, is that developments have now been made in terms of what will be for treatment in terms of a vaccine for COVID-19. If we start off from here now, there's been talks of COVAX. What is COVAX, and what is its role then in and what will the role of this now would be for both of you. What will be the role then in rolling this out, especially coming out for African countries, developing countries rather?
Well, it's a very good question, and I was following the debate prior to me joining, where one of your colleagues was speaking about the need to avoid, if you like, a nationalization of the search for vaccines. Yesterday, the European Union signed, I think it was the 6th contract with a vaccine producer. Yesterday was with Mordue, and quite clearly securing rapidly vaccines for European citizens is one of the priorities of the European Union. But our other priority, and it's just as much a priority as securing rapidly vaccines for European citizens, is to try and make sure that everyone has access to vaccines everywhere in the world. And there needs to be what I would describe perhaps as an affordable equitable, like fair distribution of the vaccines. And this is why, as Team Europe, we've contributed close to just under €1 billion to the so-called COVAX facility. And Catherin will be able to explain in a bit more detail how this works in practical terms. But the idea, in very simple terms, is to make sure that lower and middle income countries can have access to the vaccines that are being produced now and in the future, and that together we can serve the world with these vaccines to end the pandemic. Because I think the one big lesson we've seen in this pandemic is this is not a time for unilateralism. This is a time for working together, and the vaccine doesn't recognise borders. And this is precisely what is behind the COVAX, where we're working hand in hand with the EIB. And Catherin and I have been able to discuss this with CS Kagwe a couple of weeks ago, and we're looking at how we can effectively support this in Kenya. Maybe if you allow me to pass over to Catherin to explain in more detail how this works in practice.
Sure.
Okay, so actually, I mean, you know, that may not be visible in Kenya, but I mean, jointly with the EU, the EIB has been helping a lot in the development of vaccines. I mean, we have actually provided financial support in Europe for development of vaccines, and we were very happy when you know, 2 of those came out as, you know, likely to be a solution to the problem. Now, coming to COVAX, I mean, COVAX is really a mechanism that's pooling resources globally to share vaccine development risks and costs, because there is a huge cost involved. And then it also pools this resource to support the manufacturing and the procurement of vaccines in sufficient volumes, because that brings the price down, and then allow equitable access globally. So what will happen here is that together with the European Union, actually, we have put on the EIB side €400 million of financing that is going to this global alliance for vaccines that's called Gavi. And the Kenya knows Gavi very well. Mm-hmm. And Gavi will actually manage this COVAX facility, which is a pool of funds. But what we are doing here, because this Gavi relies on donation from foundation, from countries, from rich countries, but you know, there is always a bit of a time lag in between the moment the commitment or the pledge is announced and the moment the cash comes in, to put it simply. What we are doing, we are bringing the cash immediately, because we have the financial power to do that, together with the European Union. That will allow Gavi, and using the COVAX, to make advance payments to the manufacturing industry to produce these vaccines. But the condition to our financing is that these amounts have to go for the production of vaccine doses that will be reserved for low and middle income countries, including Kenya. Mm-hmm. And that will be there to produce vaccine dose up to 20% of the population of the country. There is a bit of a formula there, so it may vary from country to country. But it's a fair and equitable process that allows, you know, that everybody will get vaccine dose. And I think that's a very innovative way of doing it, because we are really monetizing something to respond to an emergency need and make sure that it goes everywhere in an equitable way. I think the European Union, together with the EIB, we were probably the only one who put in place this facility, which is very innovative. The structure from a financing point is very complicated, but I think the main point is to know that Kenya will be able to reach out to Gavi, and I think they will be advised by the World Health Organization on which vaccines would be the best suited for the Kenyan context. And indeed, we heard talking about the logistical problems that may be linked to some vaccines requiring very low temperature that may not be adapted. And I think there was a news this week that there may be another vaccine where the logistic would be a bit more practical, I would say. So there are, and then, you know, they will work together so that Kenya can get their vaccine dose. And then thereafter, if Kenya wants to get more, we are there to help as well, together with the other financial institutions, to provide support to the government of Kenya directly so that they can buy more vaccine doses. So I think that's the way it works. So you will not see EIB's name on the vaccines themselves, but we are behind with the EU, and I think the support that is provided there is actually critical to make sure that these vaccines will come to Kenya.
I wish I could find another word to describe the commendable work that the European Investment Bank is doing. But the question I need to ask, and this is the debate that we've had, is it's not in doubt that eventually Kenya and many of the poorer or third world countries will actually receive the vaccine. The question is, will they receive it at the same time as the Western nations? It's for both
Simon?
of you.
Well,
I personally would say yes.
Okay,
absolutely.
And so what? If I understand the word yes here, it's to mean that the intervention that the European Investment Bank and the European Union have put in place is to guarantees the word here, that when the vaccines are made available, everyone, let's talk about Kenya will be able to receive it at the same time people in Belgium or in Brussels will be receiving it. Is that what we're saying?
That is absolutely correct. Yes. Our priority is to make sure that everyone has access to vaccines everywhere in the world, and that the distribution of the vaccines is both fair and equitable, but also affordable. And that's precisely what the funding that the EU is putting into the COVAX initiative is designed to achieve.
Sure. What are some of the challenges that we're looking at then with the rollout of this vaccine? We heard from the G20 just a couple of days ago that this, just what you've said, is at the crux of the matter, that we're going to make sure that everybody has access to it, and we're going to make sure that nobody will be left out. And in terms of cost, it'll be what people will be able to afford. I mean, these are conversations that are being had at the moment. But then now, what are some of the challenges that you see in the rollout of the same in terms of cost and in terms of efficiency and efficacy when it comes to rolling it out in the country, around the continent? What are we looking at here, and what could pose as roadblocks?
Well, quite clearly, maybe I'll start, Catherin, then
yes.
You come in if you're comfortable. If we look at the development of COVID-19 vaccine generally, first, it's been a costly process for manufacturers, and we've seen through the running debate on the trials that there's also been a quite high failure rate. This is why choosing to invest in a COVID-19 vaccine has been a high-risk decision for vaccine developers. And these agreements that I spoke about, when I said yesterday that the European Union had concluded its 6th agreement, these agreements have been trying to stimulate and make possible investments that otherwise might not have happened. And I mean, Catherin spoke to earlier, the European Investment Bank, for example, with BioNTech, had concluded a debt financing agreement, which in simple terms allowed the company to very rapidly expand its manufacturing capacity in order to supply their vaccine quickly worldwide. And I think we're now at the point where an effective COVID-19 vaccine is within our reach. This is a truly historic achievement that has resonated globally. And I think the challenge we now face together is that the vaccines become available throughout the world simultaneously, and not only in rich countries. And that is what we're trying to achieve together with the COVAX. But it's going to need a lot of work. I mean, Catherin spoke about one of the vaccines, for example, requiring storage at minus 80 degrees. It's going to need a lot of infrastructure, and it's going to need, I suspect, quite a lot of patience and a clear strategy for how one approaches the rollout and how one makes choices also within Kenya as to who will benefit first. Do you privilege those who are vulnerable? Do you privilege frontline health workers? How do you decide upon your distribution strategy? And again, this is where, for me, the key lesson we have to draw is let's share globally the experiences, pool our knowledge together, pool our success stories together, and learn from the mistakes that will inevitably be made everywhere, and work in real partnership. And I think together we will be able to make that difference. I think we may also need as well an active communication strategy. We have still seen that Globally, there are cases where positive COVID-19 patients experience some stigma. This is also clearly something that may hamper vaccine distribution activities. So let's work on communicating about this. Having tested positive for COVID-19, it's not a stigma. It's a consequence of the global challenge we all face, but let's work together.
I mean, that insistence on working together, I think that would be something that sees it going beyond COVID. The vaccine will be rolled out, people will get treated, and we'll get to a place where then we're able to live with COVID, whereby you get it, you're treated, or that you can at least prevent it. But I'm seeing beyond that, and looking at the partnerships with the EIB and the European Union, can we then look at it as a way where you can always work together moving forward? The things that will come about, because COVID will not be the last opportunity for working together, as you've talked about. There will be numerous other things that will come, as opposed to looking at a situation whereby it's hand-me-downs in terms of help and assistance, but working together even if the assistance is coming from a larger part. Do you see this as an opportunity or a way that would go in the future whereby more working together can actually happen as two parties that come to the table?
No, absolutely, and that was basically the main thrust of the discussions yesterday between President Kenyatta and President Michel. You know, take for example trade. The European Union is a very significant trading partner to Kenya. Not only are we the largest export market for Kenya, but quite a lot of the export logistics and services around trade are provided by EU companies. And there is a huge potential for expanding that relationship. Take agriculture. Today, something like 70% of Kenya's agricultural exports go to the European Union. But I think we would have an appetite and a wish to see much, much more. And equally, a willingness on our side to accompany the Kenyan agri-processing industry in a rise up the value chain, so much more of that value can be left in the Kenyan market. Or, you know, another example, some of the work we've done together on renewable energies. Again, an example of the European Investment Bank and European Union partnership with Kenya, the Lake Turkana wind power. It's a flagship project for Kenya. It's a flagship project for the European Union. It's the largest wind power plant on the African continent, and it produces 17% of Kenya's energy on a daily basis with zero emissions. Everybody's interest. And these are the kind of projects and kind of partnerships that we're looking to continue.
Well, thank you very much, and we also thank the European citizens and the taxpayers for the kind of support that we have received as a country, and we hope to see more of this cooperation and also just demand for accountability, like you've said. Thank you very much, Simon Mordue, the EU ambassador to Kenya, as well as Catherin, Collin, the regional representative for the European Investment Bank, for joining us today. Hoping to speak with you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.